The rain fell hard on Fort Garrison that October morning in 2019, tapping against the windows of the administrative office like it had a message to deliver. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood in the doorway, water dripping from her dress uniform, waiting to be acknowledged by Colonel James Hadley. He sat behind his desk, not looking up from his papers, making her wait. This was his way. Sarah had learned long ago not to take it personally. She was good at not taking things personally. That skill had kept her alive through 2 deployments to Afghanistan and 1 to Iraq. It had also kept her invisible. "Sir, you wanted to see me," she said, keeping her voice steady and professional. Colonel Hadley finally looked up. He was a big man with a broad face and small, calculating eyes. He'd never liked Sarah much, though she couldn't remember doing anything to earn his dislike. She just existed in his command, and somehow that was enough. "Mitchell, yes, close the door," he said. She did. The rain got quieter, but not quiet enough. "I've been reviewing the reports from Operation Desert Guard," he continued, leaning back in his chair. "Your team's performance was adequate, nothing remarkable." Sarah felt something pinch inside her chest, but she didn't show it. "Thank you for the feedback, sir." "We're reorganizing the intelligence unit," he went on. "I'm moving you out of your current position. Captain Torres will be taking over your responsibilities. He's got better instincts for leadership, more natural authority." Sarah had trained Torres. She'd written half the protocols he would be using, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that saying nothing was often the wisest choice. "Yes, sir, when?" she asked. "Effective immediately. You'll be transferred to records management. It's important work, Mitchell. Somebody has to do it." Records management, filing, organizing documents that nobody would ever read. It was the kind of job they gave to people they wanted to forget about. The kind of job that ended careers quietly without anyone having to explain why. "I understand, sir," Sarah said. "Good, that's the thing about you, Mitchell. You're a good soldier. You follow orders. You don't make waves. That's valuable. The Army needs soldiers like you." He picked up his pen and looked back at his papers. "You're dismissed." Sarah drove back to her small house in town that evening, the rain still falling. The house was a rental, a plain 2-bedroom with white siding and a small porch. She'd bought it 6 years ago when she realized she wanted something that was hers, something that didn't move with the wind and orders of the military. She decorated it carefully, with photographs of her family and paintings she'd bought at local craft fairs. Her mother called that night, like she did every Tuesday. "How was work, honey?" her mother asked. "Fine," Sarah said. "Busy." "You don't sound fine. You sound tired." Sarah looked out the window at the rain. "I got reassigned today, new position." "Is that good?" "It's different," Sarah said, and that was the most honest thing she could say. After they hung up, Sarah sat in the dark of her living room and let herself feel it. The anger, the frustration, the sense of being pushed down, pressed into the ground like someone trying to extinguish a small flame. She had given 14 years to the Army. 14 years of sacrifice, of missing birthdays and holidays, of learning to live with the sound of gunfire in her ears and the weight of impossible decisions. She had saved lives. She had made the hard calls that meant someone went home to their family. She had trained good soldiers and built teams that worked like clockwork. And now she was going to file papers in a basement office. But Sarah was good at compartmentalizing. That was a skill, too. By the next morning, the anger was packed away where it couldn't hurt her. She reported to her new position in the records management office in Building C, a concrete structure with no windows and fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. Her new supervisor was a lieutenant named David Chen, young and uncertain in his position. He showed her to her desk, a metal surface with a computer that was 5 years old, and explained her duties in a voice that sounded almost apologetic. "You'll be organizing digital files," he said, "creating databases, making sure everything is properly archived and accessible." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. She settled into her chair and looked at the stacks of files that surrounded her desk like walls. This was her new world, a basement office with no windows and no one to talk to but Lieutenant Chen, who came by twice a day and always looked guilty about it. For 3 months, Sarah went to work and did exactly what she was told. She organized files. She created databases. She came home and made dinner for one. She did her physical training in the morning, the only part of her day that still felt like her own. And she told no one how much it hurt to be erased. But then something happened that would change everything. On a cold January morning, as Sarah was organizing files from a 2017 training mission, she found something that didn't fit. A report that had been filed incorrectly, or maybe not incorrectly, maybe on purpose. It was a casualty report from an operation in Yemen that had been listed as completed. According to the official records, 3 soldiers had been killed in a firefight. Their names were there, clear and final. The report was signed off by Colonel Hadley himself, stamped with the official seal of approval. But Sarah knew those soldiers, or rather, she had known them. She had trained them, and the names on this report didn't match the names she remembered from the operation debrief that she had been part of. In fact, these names belonged to soldiers who had been sick that day, who hadn't gone on the mission at all. Sarah sat very still at her desk, the report in her hands, and tried to understand what she was seeing. 3 soldiers listed as killed in action. 3 soldiers who, as far as Sarah knew, had never gone to Yemen at all. She looked around the empty office. Lieutenant Chen was out. She was alone. Sarah carefully photographed the report with her phone. Then she photographed the next 5 pages. She knew she shouldn't. She knew this violated about 50 regulations, but something in her, that same thing that had kept her alive in combat, that instinct that knew when something was wrong, told her this mattered. She placed the original report back in its file and returned the file to its place. Then she went about her day like nothing had happened, filing papers and creating databases, her heart beating too fast the whole time. That night, Sarah sat in her house with the rain beating against the windows again, and she looked at the photographs on her phone. 3 names listed as killed in action. 3 soldiers who she was fairly certain were alive and undeployed on the day that report was dated. She knew what this meant. She knew the implications. And she knew that uncovering it would destroy her career, probably her life in the military. But Sarah Mitchell had never been very good at walking away from injustice. That was the problem with being a good soldier. You followed orders. You didn't make waves. But sometimes the waves were already crashing, and you had to decide whether you were going to pretend you didn't see them. Sarah made a decision that night, sitting in the dark of her living room, listening to the rain. She was going to find out the truth about those 3 names, and she was going to do whatever it took to prove it, no matter what it cost her. She had no idea how much that decision was going to cost her, or what it would eventually reveal. The 3 soldiers whose names appeared on the casualty report were Private James Rodriguez, Sergeant Mike Carver, and Corporal Nathan Hayes. All 3 had supposedly been killed in a firefight near Sana'a, Yemen, on March 14, 2017. All 3 had been part of Sarah's intelligence unit before they were reassigned. But Sarah remembered clearly. She remembered because she had specifically noted their absence from the deployment roster. The 3 men had reported to sick bay with a viral infection the week before the Yemen mission. She remembered because she had spent 6 hours reorganizing the team to account for their absence. She remembered because one of them, Rodriguez, had called her from the medical unit to apologize for leaving her short-handed. Sarah had decided that finding the truth meant going through channels first. She would be smart about this. She would be professional. She would do this the right way. She requested a private meeting with Major Lisa Freeman, the base's Deputy Inspector General. Major Freeman was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that made people nervous. She was known for taking her job seriously and not caring much about politics or hierarchy when it came to doing the right thing. She was also someone who had been passed over for promotion twice, which Sarah knew meant she had probably made enemies in high places by asking inconvenient questions. The meeting took place on a Tuesday afternoon in a small office on the 2nd floor of headquarters. Major Freeman gestured for Sarah to sit and closed the door behind them. "Captain Mitchell, I understand you have some concerns about a report," Freeman said, settling behind her desk. Sarah had prepared for this. She had rehearsed what she would say. She had planned her words carefully, knowing that her career probably depended on how she said the next few minutes. "Ma'am, I came across a discrepancy in the casualty records from Operation Desert Guard," Sarah said. "I believe there may have been an error in the filing of a casualty report from Yemen in March 2017. Freeman's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw her sit forward slightly. "What kind of discrepancy?" "The report lists 3 soldiers as killed in action. I have reason to believe that at least 2 of those soldiers did not participate in the operation. They were medically unable to deploy." "And your source for this information?" Freeman asked. "My personal recollection. I was the operations coordinator for that unit. It was my responsibility to track who was deployed and who was not. I remember this specifically because the absences meant we had to reorganize the team." Freeman was quiet for a moment. She opened a drawer and pulled out a notebook. "Give me the names." Sarah gave her the names: Rodriguez, Carver, Hayes. Freeman wrote them down slowly, her pen moving carefully across the page. When she finished, she looked at Sarah over the top of her reading glasses. "This is a serious allegation," Freeman said. "Do you understand that?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're accusing someone, I'm not going to say who, but someone, of filing a false casualty report. That's fraud. That's mishandling of military records. That's potentially a federal crime." "Yes, ma'am." "And you understand what happens to someone who brings this kind of allegation and can't back it up with solid evidence?" Sarah nodded. She understood perfectly. She would be finished in the Army. Her career would be over. She would be labeled as someone who made false accusations, and she would never work another day in this institution. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." Freeman leaned back in her chair and studied Sarah for a long moment. "I'm going to look into this. Quietly. I'm going to run a preliminary investigation and see if there's anything to your concerns. But I need you to understand something, Captain. If you're right, if you found something real here, this is going to be much bigger than you expect. Do you understand?" "No, ma'am, I'm not sure I understand." "What you found, if it's real, means that someone in a position of authority falsified casualty records. That's not a small thing. That's not something that gets buried quietly or handled at the unit level. If this is real, it goes up the chain. It goes to the Army Criminal Investigation Division. It might go to Congress. It becomes bigger than any one person, any one commander. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah thought about her house. She thought about her career. She thought about the 14 years she had put into serving her country. She thought about 3 men whose names were recorded as dead when they were probably alive. She thought about the families of those men, if they truly believed their loved ones were gone, if they were grieving for nothing. "Yes, ma'am," she said, "I'm prepared." Freeman nodded and closed her notebook. "All right, then, give me 2 weeks." The next 2 weeks were the longest of Sarah's life. She went to work every day and filed her papers and organized her databases. She went to the gym and ran 5 miles each morning, pushing her body until her mind stopped spinning with worry and doubt. She came home and sat in her quiet house and waited. Then on a Thursday evening, Major Freeman called her. "I need to see you, not at the base. There's a coffee shop on Main Street, the one called Riverside. Can you meet me there at 6 p.m.? Sarah's heart rate spiked. "Yes, ma'am, I'll be there." The coffee shop was warm and filled with the smell of espresso and cinnamon. Sarah sat in the corner booth and waited, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that was too hot to drink. Major Freeman arrived at 6:15, wearing civilian clothes, looking tired. "I can't stay long," Freeman said, sitting across from her. "I'm being watched. I didn't know that was happening, but I am. Someone knows I was asking questions." "About the report?" Sarah asked. "About everything. I pulled the original casualty report, the one that was filed in 2017. The physical copy, I mean, not the digital version. The physical version has a different signature on it, an initial, not a full name. I had it checked. That initial doesn't match any standard military signature code." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Meaning someone forged that signature. Meaning that report was altered after it was originally filed. I went back to the digital archive. The digital version shows different names than the physical version shows. Someone has been changing the records over time, trying to make them consistent, trying to cover their tracks. "Can you prove it?" Sarah asked. "I have evidence of the discrepancy, but I can't do more than that without setting off alarms. Someone is already watching me, Captain. I think they know someone started asking questions about that report. I think they know it was probably you." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. She had known this was possible, but knowing and experiencing it were 2 different things. "What do I do?" she asked. "You need to be very careful, very careful. Don't talk to anyone about this. Don't access any more files. Don't do anything that draws attention to yourself. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. I'm going to escalate this to the Army Criminal Investigation Division." I'm going to do it quietly and carefully, and I'm going to make sure there's a paper trail that shows this didn't come from you. Can you trust me to do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "All right, go home, live your life, and prepare yourself for things to change." Sarah left the coffee shop that night knowing that the world she had lived in for the past 3 weeks, the world where she held a secret and was the only one who knew, was about to explode. She didn't know when or how, but she knew it was coming. What she didn't know was that she was about to become the casualty they had been trying to create all along. 2 months later, Sarah's world fell apart in exactly the way you'd expect it to, and also in ways she never could have predicted. The first sign was subtle. She came to work one morning and found that her access to the file systems had been revoked. Her computer wouldn't log in. When she reported it to Lieutenant Chen, he looked at her with an expression somewhere between pity and fear. "There's a hold on your access," he said quietly, not making eye contact. "I think you need to go see the colonel." Sarah walked through the corridors of Fort Garrison with her stomach tightening with each step. She knew what was coming. She just didn't know exactly how it would come. Colonel Hadley's office was cold and impersonal. He sat at his desk with 2 other officers she didn't recognize. One was a full colonel, the other was a major from the Criminal Investigation Division. "Captain Mitchell, please sit," Colonel Hadley said, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah sat. The rain was falling outside his window again, just like it had been the day he'd first told her about her reassignment. "We're conducting a full investigation into the classified files that were accessed from the Records Management Office," the major from CID said. He was a thin man with sharp features and sharper eyes. "We have evidence that someone has been photographing classified documents and transferring information outside of secure channels. We need to ask you some questions." "I haven't transferred any classified information," Sarah said calmly. "But you have photographed documents," the major said. It wasn't a question. Sarah's mind raced. She had photographed the casualty report. She had done exactly what they were accusing her of. But she had done it for a reason. She had done it to uncover fraud. "I photographed one document," Sarah said carefully. "I did so because I believed it contained information about a falsified record." "You photographed a classified casualty report," the major said. "You used your personal phone to create digital copies of military documents. That's a federal crime, Captain Mitchell. That's a violation of the Espionage Act. That's a violation of military code. That's the kind of thing that ends careers." "I did it to report a fraud," Sarah said. "Did you now?" The major leaned back in his chair. "And who did you report this alleged fraud to?" Sarah felt a cold hand grip her chest. She remembered Major Freeman's warning. She remembered Freeman saying she was being watched. She had assumed that Freeman had filed a report with CID. But what if something had happened to Freeman's report? What if it had disappeared? "I reported my concerns to Major Lisa Freeman of the Inspector General's office," Sarah said. The 3 officers exchanged a look. The full colonel spoke for the first time. "Major Freeman has since transferred to Fort Liberty. She's no longer at this installation," he said. "She's also no longer with the Army. She resigned her commission 3 weeks ago." The room felt like it was tilting. Freeman had resigned. Freeman had left the Army. Why would she do that unless something had happened, unless she had been forced out? "I don't understand," Sarah said, though she was beginning to. "Major Freeman made some serious allegations about command structure and reporting procedures," the CID major continued. "Those allegations have been deemed baseless after a preliminary investigation. However, those allegations did serious damage to morale and command effectiveness in this unit, and they appear to have been prompted by your unauthorized access to classified files." "I didn't," Sarah started. "You're being suspended pending a full investigation," the colonel interrupted. "You'll be confined to quarters. You won't have access to any military installations or classified materials. You'll surrender your military ID and your weapon. You'll be read your rights by the JAG office and you'll have access to military counsel. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said. Her voice sounded very small and very far away. "Good. Someone will escort you out of this building now." Sarah walked out of Fort Garrison that afternoon in the rain, with nothing but her house keys and her phone. A military police officer drove her home in silence and then took her military ID and her service weapon. Sarah stood in her driveway and watched him drive away, and then she went inside and closed the door. She didn't have internet access to military channels. She had no way to communicate with anyone still in the service. She was alone. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah learned what it meant to be erased. The military had a process for this, and they executed it with cold efficiency. Her pay was frozen pending investigation. The charges against her weren't made public, but somehow everyone knew. Friends from her unit stopped returning her calls. People from town who had always been friendly suddenly found other stores to shop at. Sarah hired a civilian lawyer, a man named Thomas Webb, who specialized in military cases. Webb was in his 60s, with gray hair and a tired expression that suggested he had seen a lot of injustice and was tired of fighting it but fought it anyway. "This is bad," Webb told her in his office downtown. "They've accused you of violating the Espionage Act. That's a federal crime. That's serious time if they push it." "But I didn't violate the act. I photographed one document to report a crime," Sarah said. "That's not how the government sees it. The government sees someone accessing classified materials without authorization and then transferring information about those materials to an unauthorized person. That's what they see. That's what they have on record." "But what about the casualty report? What about the fraud?" "What about it?" Webb asked. "Do you have the casualty report?" "No, it's back at the base." "Do you have photographs of it?" "They were on my personal phone. Military police confiscated my phone." "So you have no evidence," Webb said. "And the only person who could corroborate your story, Major Freeman, is no longer in the military and has apparently disappeared." Sarah felt something break inside her. She disappeared. Not literally disappeared, but she's not returning calls. Her forwarding address is a P.O. box. It's like she's gone to ground, probably on legal advice. If she testifies to what she found, she could be dragged into this whole mess as an accomplice to your alleged Espionage Act violations. I'm guessing her lawyer told her to stay quiet and stay away. "So I'm alone," Sarah said. "For now, yes, you're alone unless something changes." Sarah left Webb's office and drove to Riverside Coffee Shop, the place where she had met Major Freeman. It was a Wednesday morning and the shop was mostly empty. Sarah ordered a coffee and sat in the corner booth, the same one she'd sat in before, and she cried silently into her hands. She was still a soldier. She had been suspended, not discharged. She still believed in the oath she had taken, the one that said she would defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But the Constitution wasn't defending her. The Army wasn't defending her. She was alone. Sarah spent the next month confined to her house, a ghost in a place that was supposed to be her home. She went to physical therapy after the stress fractures in her feet from too much running were diagnosed. She sat on her porch and watched the town go by and wondered how many people knew about her charges, how many people thought she was a criminal. It was on a Tuesday evening at the end of that month when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but she answered anyway. She had nothing left to lose. "Captain Mitchell?" It was a man's voice, steady and professional. "My name is Robert Keaton. I'm a journalist with the Washington Post. I'd like to talk to you about what happened at Robert Keaton came to Sarah's house on a Thursday morning in late April, and he carried with him a folder filled with documents that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat." He was a tall man in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and intelligent eyes. He sat at Sarah's kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened the folder carefully, like he was handling something fragile. "I got a tip from a source I trust," Keaton said. "This source told me that there was a soldier at Fort Garrison who had uncovered evidence of falsified casualty records and was being prosecuted for it. The source said that the falsification involved covering up a cash-for-records scheme. Soldiers were being listed as KIA in combat operations they never participated in exchange for money paid to certain officers. And when one soldier tried to expose it, she became the target." Sarah stared at him. "Who's your source?" "I can't tell you that, journalist privilege. But I can tell you that my source has documentation, real documentation, documents that prove what happened." Keaton pulled out photocopies of documents. Sarah recognized one immediately. It was a portion of the original casualty report, the one with the forged signature. But there were others. Bank records showing irregular deposits, email communications between officers discussing the operation in careful, coded language, orders directing the transfer of soldiers out of units where they might ask questions. "How did your source get these?" Sarah asked. "That's complicated," Keaton said. but my source has been investigating this for a long time. When this source learned that you were taking the fall for uncovering the truth, my source decided it was time to come forward. My source is ready to talk to me on record, but only if I can get your story first. Only if I can prove that you were targeted for doing the right thing.